Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for our Lean Focus webinar series. Today's topic is Develop, Grow, Leverage, and Monetize Your Product Portfolio with IP Strategy Deployment. I'm your host, April Lee, and I'm the Managing Director of Lean Focus. For today's presentation, we have a unique program that brings together our VP of Innovation, George Ellis, and our Senior VP of Private Equity and Legal Practice, Ephraim Starr. The R&D and product management of a business heavily relies on the key competitive advantage of intellectual property protections. And during today's session, we bring both of these perspectives and insights together for you. We're fortunate to have both of their perspectives and considerations to help your business maintain strategic advantage over the long term. So for the next slide, before we begin, just a reminder that today's presentation is the proprietary information of Lean Focus and should not be used, disclosed, or reproduced without the consent of Lean Focus. Title in and to this presentation and all information contained herein remains at all times in Lean Focus LLC. On the next slide, we're just going to go over some quick webinar logistics. You are in listen-only mode. There are some PDF handouts made available in the control panel that you can download that will help support this topic. A question and answer segment will be held at the end. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and type these into the chat function for our presenters to answer as time allows. And lastly, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you about 1 day later. So you may have to check your spam folder if you don't see it. On the next slide, before we begin the presentation, I'll go ahead and share a little bit about Lean Focus and what we do. Our focus is helping clients transform into high-performance cultures by helping teach, coach, and sustain results using our proprietary Lean Focus business system tools and processes. We pride our team on their hands-on experience in teaching, demonstrating, and applying these towards live business challenges, leading by example and demonstrating these core leadership values. Our team focuses on both developing site leaders through our training and mentoring practices, or we can also place high-level executives through our talent solutions services. Our goal is to really help you hit the ground running, developing your current team and enhancing your team where needed. Change management is also a critical element of culture sustainment, and we help your team to build continuous improvement mindset and ways of working through their daily practices and building best practices put to work in repeatable processes. Lastly, our proven systems that we use in both implementing as well as licensing these materials for companies. We help them try to build their own businesses and achieve results in both the near and long term. On the next slide, we'll show you how our 8 business practice areas help us to drive operations, growth, and strategic improvements within your business based on the unique industry, challenge areas, product types, and organizational needs you might have. Our team comes from leadership backgrounds that help you navigate your strategy at a holistic, enterprise-wide level with abilities to drive down and teach associates how to implement and sustain those improvements on the front line. On the next slide, we will show you some examples of just different companies that we've helped to build high-performance cultures with. And as you can see, our methodology is industry agnostic and can be applicable to areas of operations as well as commercial areas like sales, marketing, R&D, legal, and finance. We help our clients identify what strategic objective they're trying to achieve and then apply the right approach and Lean tool to help get them there. On the next slide, it may be a little hard to read, but it's our Lean Focus Business System tool set. And what we do is we help identify what challenge you're facing, and then we can help you identify which tools the right approach appropriate to help you improve that. But the Lean Focus Business System tools is really a tool set to build your sustainable culture using common lexicon and process-driven approaches. Our materials can be licensed as well, where you can help build out a Lean Business System set that works best for your company and then hit the ground running immediately to drive that culture of continuous improvement, people development, and performance achievement. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ephraim and George. Ephraim?
Hi, everybody. Just wanted to briefly introduce myself. I've been practicing with Lean Focus for a little over a year now, but I'm a licensed attorney. Started out my career nearly 30 years ago as a registered patent attorney, and I've served as the lead of the intellectual property function for an IP powerhouse, Lenovo, which was an IBM carve-out. It's known for its ThinkPad line of products and has a stable of engineers who are named inventors on thousands of patents. I started my career in litigation with a focus on intellectual property litigation, and I've successfully enforced patents throughout my career, including once securing a $60 million award in a pan-European patent dispute against an automotive competitor. of a company that I was employed with at the time. George, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ephraim. And so I'm George. My background is in R&D, and and I have a few patents, and so I've had the help of people like Ephraim that have been able to guide me. I've spent most of my time as a contributor, a technical contributor, and then moved into leadership roles about 15 years ago. I discovered Lean with the company that bought us at the time. Danaher came and helped taught Lean to our whole company, and just watched it change how people behave, how they were engaged with what they were doing, how much more satisfied they were with their work, how we were able to reach our goals, and how we were able to measure just everything. And we're going to talk about measuring how intellectual property is, as part of this conversation, one of the harder areas to measure. But it was through that experience of 15 years of being part of a company that was using Lean and innovation that I just fell in love with it and joined Lean Focus about 1.5 years ago, just to focus completely on the field. So glad to be with you, and so glad to have Ephraim with us. I think April said it well. This is a place where we want to have you really need the legal side, and then you also want basically the inventors and the mentors when you're doing this kind of work. So Ephraim, thanks so much for joining us as we go through this. And Ephraim actually developed a lot of the material that you guys are going to see. He and I work together pretty closely, and it was a good experience.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, sure. And so I want to spend just a couple minutes. If you've come to some of the webinars that we've done before, I always take a minute and just talk about how does lean thinking really affect innovation? Because most people think of lean thinking as something I do in the factory. I have a 5S, I do a VSM, I figure out what my tack time is, I go, do a standard work event. They're very factory oriented. How does it affect innovation? And in fact, it does. And lean thinking is just as applicable in innovation as it is anywhere else in the organization, including the factory, but it's different. And so this is the lean innovation journey. And we at Lean Focus believe in the journey that begins at things like segmentation, figuring out segments I want to serve, creating strategies to grow my company, and developing the IP that goes along with it, which is what we're going to talk about today. We think that's where the journey starts. It proceeds through figuring out what my roadmaps are, then picking individual projects and moving them through a pipeline and successfully launching them with good financial performance for the launch products that we can invest and go launch more. This journey for most companies is roughly a 10-year journey. Today, we're just going to talk about one part of it, which is the IP strategy deployment. When I think about where lean thinking interfaces in innovation, or I should say, at what cadence, there's really 3 cadences. One of them is annual strategic deployment. Like, for example, at your company, you might be thinking, we really have to build a culture that's more oriented towards gaining intellectual property. That might be a strategy deployment initiative that you would execute through innovation. So when you think about strategy deployment, it's things that really are going to change the company, and it's generally held at an annual cadence. The next level where we interface is assessing the organization, planning the org. These are kind of one-time events that we do. But then we move down and we start deploying tools that cut waste. And we're always deploying new tools. We're always finding things that are issues that we want to get better at. And so we might be deploying tools in an organization 2-3 times a year. So think of this as like a quarterly cadence. And then lean thinking teaches problem solving, all sorts of problem solving, and getting people into innovation to think about problem solving, like, hey, my project just slipped. How do I fix that problem? Hey, we don't do enough intellectual property. How am I going to go drive more intellectual property in our development process? That would be a problem. And then we create daily management for it and problem solving. And this is happening at the daily, weekly cadence. So lean thinking and innovation meet up very well. And you don't need a single example from the factory. You don't need to go do anything from the factory. We're going to use the principles, but we're going to really apply them just in the areas of innovation. And so today we're going to talk about IP strategy deployment. And so we're going to talk about 4 elements. One of them is just about training our staff. One is about how we align IP to our protocol. One is about how we build IP into our toll gate system or your phase gate system so that you know what happens. And then the last one is how do you manage the application idea patent funnel. And Ephraim and I will be switching off as we go through this presentation to speak about these. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about these, Ephraim, before I moved on.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me expand on this. I think I'm going to cover the next slide, but just on these 4 elements, you could think of these as understanding, aligning, building, and then managing your IP going forward. You may be wondering, what is IP strategy deployment? IP strategy deployment is akin to strategy deployment or Hoshin-Kanri. It's a rigorous approach for driving breakthrough improvements for a business. In this case, with a focus on the development and deployment of intellectual property assets. So consider, what are you doing with your IP assets today, and what bigger, more impactful role can they play for you in 3 to 5 years, just like you might do with your breakthrough deployment efforts when you're running Hoshin-Kanri.
That's super, thanks, Ephraim. And let me just, excellent.
So IP training, why is it important for inventors to know the IP basics? Well, first of all, your inventors are your source of innovation. That may sound obvious. Keep in mind, of course, your innovation may come from anywhere in your organization. It doesn't just have to be your R&D organization, but your inventors need to know how to recognize their own patentable concepts and how to support the patent attorneys or patent agents who will be securing your intellectual property assets with the US Patent Office and other patent offices across the globe. Your innovators and inventors are a key source also of competitive intelligence. They need to know how to play their role in a cross-functional team that assesses both freedom to operate issues as well as competitive or white space opportunities. And then lastly, your innovators and inventors are a source of litigation risk for your company, because no doubt they're behind the scenes talking to themselves in emails and putting down in writing all sorts of things that can be damning for you in the future. So your inventors need to be educated in the art of what I call document creation or careful communications. So those are 3 reasons why it's very important for your inventors to know the IP basics.
Go to the next slide.
Yes, yeah, over to you, George.
Yeah, and so the other thing we want to talk about is how do we align the IP roadmap to what's going on in our product roadmap. So if we step back, we'll have strategic planning. Most companies have some level of strategic planning. A lot have strategy deployment, and normally what they're doing is they're developing roadmaps that generate revenue. So think of these little mustard colored boxes as like different projects that are running across the years. Now, to be able to support those products, I'm probably going to have to develop, as an organization, we're probably going to have to develop new technologies. Now, that might be developing them organically. It might be going out and partnering with a third party to develop. It might be through the acquisition of somebody with the technology that we need. But typically, if you're doing truly innovative products that are over the upcoming years, you're going to have to be developing technology you don't have today. And anytime you're doing that, and that's sort of the orange boxes, and anytime you're doing that, you need to ensure that your IP roadmap is aligned with that. So typically, if we're going to start developing a technology, the first thing we want to understand is, what space do we have to operate in? And so we're probably going to be looking at patents at the time we're doing the initial technology development. And we want to make sure that we stay aligned so that when we, when we deliver value to our customers, we also have the rights that IP give us to be able to offer that. And so, as you guys can see, we want to see the roadmap is what really affects the business most directly. I mean, Ephraim mentioned that one example of what'd you say, $60 million, Ephraim, that you won in a case, and so you can directly affect the business, but normally the patents and the technology are supporting the main things that we offer, which are products and services that are innovative. And then, we also talked about we need to put that in our phase gate system. And the problem is we can have training and we can all talk about what best practices are. We can have people who go out and they create inventions. But until we build it into our standard work, and for innovation, standard work is, from almost all companies, it's their phase gate system. Unless the pieces of intellectual property process are built into that phase gate system, they're probably not going to happen on a regular basis. So we have to think about lots of things through the process. Early in the process, we're thinking about opportunity and risk. How do we search the IP space? And like I talked already about partnerships to get technology or to acquire the technology, the right to use it. As we move towards defining our projects, but before we begin them proper, we'll be refining the inventions. We'll be helping inventors. I mean, Ephraim mentioned our source of inventions is our source of IP is our inventors, and they sit everywhere in the organization, but they need help. You don't normally learn how to patent in college, and so what you learn is what you learn in your organization. So that's where Ephraim had talked a little bit about training and the power of it. And then resolving freedom to use when we see that there's something that a competitor, especially a competitor or anyone, might be already have patented. How are we going to obtain the freedom to use? How do we work in that constraint? As we move later into the project, we have to think about IP mining, and this is something I learned from Ephraim, which is after you've gone through the hard work of doing the project work, you can now look in retrospect and say, boy, where are some other opportunities to collect IP that maybe we didn't see in the beginning. And we have to think about how we're doing disclosures and how we're filing applications. All of these are processes that need to be somewhere. If you want them to happen reliably, project after project, on all your sites, across all of your disciplines, and you're not just going to rely on an individual doing a good job, if you really want to have it structured, you've got to build it into your phase gate system.
So I'd say another really critical element to success with intellectual property in your organization, and in a minute we'll talk about what success means, but another critical element in addition to having it built into your phase gate system is having an intellectual property steering committee, or an IPSC. And your IPSC should have a clear charter, who does what and why, and you should make sure that your decision making and your related metrics are guided by the true north that is embodied in your company's intellectual property strategy. So what defines that true north to your company? It really depends. What are you trying to do with your intellectual property? Are you trying to protect margins? Are you a defender optimizer? Are you taking share? Are you a newcomer to a space? Are you a tech driver? Are you creating whole new markets, et cetera? So the framework for your charter for your intellectual property steering committee should definitely be informed by your overall company strategy. Now, when you look at the sort of tactics of an IP strategy, you need to make sure that you have the right people at the table. Obviously, you need your technical people, your innovators. You need legal representation, whether that's a patent agent or a patent attorney, as well as preferably a paralegal to help document the actions and move those along with your in-house attorneys and with your outside counsel. It's also very useful to have people from marketing, to have that voice of the customer at the table when you're making decisions about your intellectual property. You may also want to have somebody from finance to help keep a check on how you're thinking about allocating your precious resources. Another key point on allocation is allocate sufficient time to these meetings. I can't tell you how many intellectual property steering committee meetings I attended throughout my career where we ran short on time because we weren't succinct, we didn't stick to a crisp agenda, and we didn't keep in mind our guiding principles throughout the decision-making process. So you really want to take charge of your agenda and make sure that you keep people on track so that you get through your decisions that you've laid out for that particular month or quarter, whatever the cadence is of your steering committee. An important reason to get through your entire agenda each time is you don't want to lose time from the conception of your inventions to the filing of those inventions. You want to avoid postponing filing decisions from 1 month to another, 1 quarter to another, in a conscious choice or a compelling reason. And then a similar point, of course, is once you've filed your patent applications, you want to avoid losing time from filing to grant, the way our patent system works. But the key point here is make sure that you have an IP steering committee and that it has a well-defined charter to guide your decision making. Next slide, George.
So now we want to talk about 7 pain points that you might be feeling in your organization that tools and processes and education and experience in intellectual property can help relieve. So these are the 7 pain points, and we'll go through them one by one. So I won't read them off right now, and but you'll see the 7 come through, and then at the end of that 7, we'll show what we believe are the right ways to relieve the pain of each of these pain points. So we'll return to a slide that looks something like this, but with solutions on the right-hand side. So the first one we want to talk about is an anemic idea funnel. So this happens often. And we deal with, Ephraim, I think you've seen this. I see this all the time. There's a lot of companies where people have ideas, but they're not complete ideas, and they're not complete enough to evaluate for moving forward. And what happens is they just kind of sit and don't move. And so, a lot of the problem is that inventors just don't have the knowledge that they need to recognize what the potential inventions are. As inventors, the patent office, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Ephraim, but the patent office has one of the criteria is that that an invention cannot be obvious to one of ordinary skill in the art. And so people who are inventors will say, oh, that's obvious. But you've been working with it every day, maybe for years. It's obvious to you, but you are not one of ordinary skill in the art. And so often the inventor doesn't recognize the potential to protect what they've invented. And then when they do, they don't always know how to present those ideas to the organization so they get a fair consideration. So the result is you can have almost no ideas in your patent funnel to even be thinking about. And I would say that is the most common case I come across. There are a lot of people with ideas, but there's nothing people are pursuing for patents.
George, I just make a practice pointer here.
Yeah.
And you may reiterate this when you get more in depth into the phase gate and how you build your IP into that. But to me, one of the richest sources of patentable innovations is when you go back and do a retrospective when you've reached the end of a phase in your phase gate system, and look at all the problems you've encountered along the way, from getting from whatever it is, whatever phase you're in, from concept to a physical design, or from a physical design to something that is mass producible, whatever the gate, the hurdle that you have. But think of all the problems that you've encountered and solved in getting through that phase gate, because those problems and solutions, those are your points where you are going to find your patentable innovation for sure. And it may seem like these are obvious innovations, but you're the first person to have encountered that problem. And so I would tell you, it probably isn't obvious. When you're in that enviable position of being the first person to encounter the problem, because you're the first person to launch this type of product, it means you're the first person coming up with that solution. And it might well not be obvious. It might also be the only practical or commercially reasonable way to solve that problem, which means you could potentially secure a pioneering patent on something that to you thought was sort of obvious at the time.
Yeah, great comment. Thanks, Ephraim. And jump in anytime. I love that's exactly what we need to hear. How do we solve this? Well, we think there are two ways to do it. First, we want right-sized training. We don't want to invite somebody for we don't think that engineers need to be trained for, or inventors need to be trained for months. But a couple of days to get the idea is really what it takes to get started. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to cut the friction by having an idea disclosure template. If you'll just, it's just as simple as having, what the elements of an idea to present a complete idea, just identifying those and getting them on paper will help your inventors submit their ideas. So I like to, Ephraim pointed out that training is really the understanding. The document form is really kind of error-proofing the disclosure so that people understand what they need to write down. It isn't obvious, even though if you've been doing it for years, it might seem to you to be obvious how to submit an idea, but that's our first solution.
I'm a huge supporter of the simpler the form, the better. What was the problem and what was your solution? And that's it. And 5 minutes to fill it out, great, because that means it's easier for the inventor. It documents the idea, then the IP steering committee can vet it, can get more information at the meeting. The patent agent or patent attorney can interview the inventor, make it easier for the inventor to provide those details without having to write it all out by hand.
Great point. Yeah, thanks, because it's, I've done where you've had to write out pages and pages, and it's such an onerous burden, it's hard to get to. But Ephraim, thanks for pointing out, it shouldn't be a big burden on the inventor. It should be easy. And then the second way is related, is inventors have to go it alone. And so, you wind up, you have an idea. I've been in this position, I have an idea. Well, first off, I'm not sure it's an idea. We talked about that in the previous slide. But the second problem that I have is, like, I'm not totally comfortable getting up in front of a room full of people and saying, I think I have this great idea that should be patented. It's not the most comfortable thing to do. You might be a little bit, first off, you might be a little bit of an introvert, so that might make it uncomfortable. You might feel like, people might feel like they're bragging, or, some other negative side of of pushing their own idea. And they might not be comfortable with the process. Like Ephraim said, they might feel like it's gonna be this huge burden, and they're just sort of stuck alone trying to figure it out. And so instead of leaving people by themselves, what we want to do is create a process, and I think the IP committee, which Ephraim will talk about later, is create a means to help people, coach them, refine their ideas, and encourage them, and make it easy, take the risk out of it. And that alone will help you bring forth ideas where you may have very few right now. Just a simple process of somebody knowing where to go to get help, a kind of IP office hours, so that people can present their inventions and be confident that they're doing it in a good way.
Yeah, so George, good point. So the IP office hours might be something that your patent agent or patent attorney holds on a weekly basis for your innovation community. Another great source of mentorship, of course, are the people who the R&D specialists themselves who have been doing this for a long time. The people like, there's a guy named Daryl Cromer that I worked with at Lenovo who has like 1,000 patents to his name. He'd be a perfect mentor for the up-and-comers in the R&D organization to just show them the ropes, walk them through the process of helping with a patent application or of running an IP steering committee, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ephraim. And I'll turn this over to you.
Sure. So competitive intelligence, the slide summarizes well sort of the pain points. Competitive intelligence can be a really important element of your intellectual property strategy. It informs you where you have opportunities to take share and price. It even develop whole new markets. It also tells you where you have the risk of losing share or being disruptive. Freedom to operate, or FTO, is a related topic. It's tangentially related to competitive intelligence, and I would tell you it's a horribly complicated topic. Some industries face nearly 1 million active patents. Back when I was working for Lenovo, there were roughly 800,000 patents in the IT space, and so you have to decide what kind of freedom to operate are you going to conduct when you're in an environment like that. You need to understand the importance of freedom to operate to your company, which is highly dependent on the industry you're operating in and the core competitors in your space. If competitive intelligence and freedom to operate are in fact important to your company, then you need to have a deliberate framework for addressing them. And flip to the next slide. So that framework might look like this. It would, first of all, you should lean heavily on your intellectual property strategy. The degree of effort that you put into this should directly correlate with the degree of actual, not perceived, IP ownership opportunities and freedom to operate risk. And then think about your sources of competitive intelligence. Your sales force, feet on the street, is usually one of the best sources of competitive intelligence because these are the people that are closest to the customer of all the people in your business. Relations team, that might seem counterintuitive. You might be scratching your head, why them? They can help you pull and analyze security filings and analyst reports, which can do deep dives on your competitors. Of course, your R&D and engineering teams, they can do teardowns and reverse engineer competitive products and services. Be sure to provide them with guidance and support as they engage in that product teardown process. Of course, your legal and IP team and your marketing team are all also good sources of competitive intelligence. But you need to apply a structured approach guided by your IP steering committee to make sure that they're working towards the right goals. Next slide, George. So infringing the IP of others is another obvious pain point. I guess if we had live feeds, a question I would ask you if you've ever been involved in patent litigation. I'm sure that some of the folks in the audience have been involved in patent litigation. You know how horribly disruptive it can be. Some of the patent litigation that I've been involved in with my company directly asserting patents or being asserted against by a direct competitor in the industry could have enormous impacts on our customers, would risk disrupting supply to the mutual customers that we shared. And so there would be times when the IP litigation had a real negative consequence years later of a customer getting out of one company and shifting their business to another company because they were upset that the other company had been sued and had their supply prevented for a time being. Of course, then there's also depositions and then the expense of litigation, very significant pain point. Go to the next slide. So some solutions, considerations beyond those listed on the slide here. Well, let me just cover this slide briefly. First, continue to use your structured cross-functional approach for dealing with competitive intelligence and freedom to operate processes, informed and supported by our IP steering committee and your charter. Take a conscious approach based on your company's risk tolerance and recognize that not all industries are created equal in this arena. use various tools to mitigate risks, legal opinions, design process changes, partnerships, and so on. Some considerations that aren't listed on the slide that you might want to think about as well: IP insurance policies are getting more prevalent. You also have the opportunity now to participate in networks such as the LOT network, LOT network, or a similar network, which are communities of, and I have no connection with LOT. I'm not a huge supporter. I never use them. I know that they're available though. It's a community of some 3,300 global industry leaders who've collaborated to immunize themselves from what are perceived as a patent troll or patent assertion entity litigation. There are also group licenses like MPEG-LA, which can be extremely important if you're operating in the video compression, audio compression space. They provide a transparent, collaborative global patent licensing scheme. It's the industry's largest patent pool that has dozens of licensing programs. These kind of programs are ways that you can essentially buy some identification for yourself when it comes to intellectual property risks. And then lastly, I would add another one that might not always be top of mind, but careful contracting with your suppliers and your customers to make sure you're allocating the risk in the right way so that you don't get put on the hook for something that is ultimately a supplier's responsibility or ultimately your customer's responsibility for how they chose to implement your particular technology. Back to you.
Ephraim, I wonder, could you talk about that topic of patent troll? Because I had the unfortunate experience of being part of potential litigation from a patent troll. I didn't even know what a troll was until I went through that. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about it.
Sure, very briefly. So patent troll it's a pejorative term. It definitely has a negative connotation, but they refer to patent assertion entities, which are entities that own patents but don't actually develop or produce any products. And maybe they came to own those patents because they purchased a portfolio from a company that was going out of business. And so they actually have no direct tie to the innovation themselves other than they own the patents now. And then they go assert those patents and try to secure money as a result of those assertions. I don't like patent trolls because I view them as taking advantage of the fact that litigation in the United States is very expensive and we don't regularly shift attorney's fees. And so there's very little downside for asserting patents as long as you have some kind of credible claim for infringement, because oftentimes the person who the patent is asserted against will settle they'll settle for a nominal fee, $50,000, $100,000, rather than fight the patent troll. So it's a pejorative term, but if you're a company like Lenovo, I will tell you, you face a patent suit from a patent troll 4 days of a 5-day week. You get a new lawsuit from a patent troll. That's how prevalent this is, especially in the IT space.
Man, I've never heard that statistic. Thanks.
So I'll cover this slide as well. So lost opportunities for IP and new products can be a pain point. You need to make sure that you're complying with the time requirements of the patent regimes in which you're operating. In the US, there is a 1-year grace period from the time when you first offer to sell your product or publish information about your technology. Between that time and when you have to file, you get 1 year. I would say I would never delay a full year. However, I would actually always advise my clients to file as soon as they can after they're aware that they have a patentable innovation that is worth protecting. So once you've got the innovation, you've made a conscious decision that it's worth spending the money to go and protect it, don't delay to file at that point. Don't use the full year. All sorts of things can happen in that year which could damage your rights. Plus, you have a limited time frame to assert your patent anyway once it's granted. It's 20 years from your filing date. So you want to make sure you take advantage of all the time that you have there. So solutions here, if you go to the next slide. Obviously, we talked about this, build IP across all the phases of your phase gate or development projects. Improve your phase gate system to ensure that you get this cross-functional review of your opportunities at every phase. Another really important point is create KPIs, key performance indicators that drive the right behaviors, and build dashboards to visualize your IP activity across your development portfolio. And then coming back to this idea of the Intellectual Property Steering Committee, run it with a regular cadence that's sufficient enough to cover the pace of your business. If your business is producing 5 patentable inventions a year, you might run your IP Steering Committee only twice a year. But if you're producing 10 patentable innovations a day, you've got to have an IP Steering Committee that is meeting no less frequently than once per month. And again, you need to schedule it so that you can get through each regular agenda so that you don't delay patent filing decisions. Patent mining is a topic we covered previously, but another thing I would add on patent mining is your effort to identify where you encountered problems, what solutions you came upon during that process, and whether they're patentable. can lead you not only to pioneering inventions, but to seemingly minor solutions that end up being enormously valuable because they are the only practical solution to that particular problem. Or this can be counterintuitive as well. They become a de facto industry standard or an actual industry standard. And I'll give you 2 examples of that. A de facto industry standard, you're all familiar with how with a modern laptop and even not so modern laptop, there's this function where you can hold down the power off key for like 8 seconds and it'll power off the computer. That was the only practical way to deal with something at the time that was called bounce, I believe, which was a phenomenon that if you could press that button off, your computer wouldn't actually turn off, and it might trigger a bad cycle for your computer. Well, that was something that IBM encountered in their development process for introducing one of the first laptops. They patented this 8-second power off, and it became an enormously valuable patent for IBM. Obviously, it's expired now, but at the time it was very valuable. An example of an actual industry standard in the video and speech compression arena. If you're in that arena, you'll be very familiar with what I'm talking about. There are patents that cover really nitpicky solutions to the coding or decoding process for compression. And those really nitpicky solutions, there's nothing particularly special about them, but they get written into standards like the ETSI standard. And now, therefore, you actually have to have a license to that patent in order to produce a cell phone or a video communication device that uses that standard. Very simple. Back to you, George.
Okay, thanks. And Ephraim, I wanted to ask you one question. I'm not sure if it quite fits in here. I think it fit in an earlier slide, but I wanted to ask you, is there value? I remember in years gone by, attorneys would talk about the value of just having a patent portfolio gives you a certain amount of strength. Even if you never assert that patent, you become harder for, it becomes harder for trolls and others to assert patents against you if you have a good framework underneath you. Is that still true?
Generally true. I would not say that's true with respect to trolls, because that's the thing that's so damning about trolls is there's no risk of countersuit for trolls. They don't produce anything, right? So there's nothing you can sue them for when you have your patent portfolio. A robust patent portfolio, I would agree, is very important when you're in a competitive landscape and your competitors have patent portfolios as well, because you may end up entering into a cross license, and then the strength of your portfolio determines what we call a balance payment for your cross license. A robust portfolio would also give you ammunition to countersue if they poked the bear, if they sued first. You would have your defense of an offense at that point. So yes, absolutely, a robust patent portfolio, even if you don't plan on inserting it, can be very valuable. Personally, I'm not a big fan of owning a lot of patents if you're never going to assert them, but some companies make that conscious decision. For example, it's very prevalent with Japanese companies to have a very robust portfolio and to do their best to avoid ever asserting the patents.
Thanks. And so pain point number 6 to go through is you have an IP funnel, but it's not really connected to the strategy. And I've definitely seen this in companies I've worked with. The people who work on the patent process are really not connected to the strategy. And so you wind up having, you can wind up having a silo of people who work on strategic planning. They don't really interface that much with people who are creating product roadmaps. And the technology roadmap people may have no idea what the strategic plan is. That I've seen quite commonly. And so in effect, the IP process is going to be so disconnected from where the company's going that it's almost unconnected. It has nothing to do with where the company wants to go. And our solution to that is that we want to stay aligned through strategic goals. And I think Ephraim alluded to that a little bit earlier, but we start off with a strategic process that says we want product growth, we want growth revenue from new products, and drive that into our product road mapping process, which then identifies gaps in technology that we need to create a product roadmap that fulfills that strategic goal. And then our technology roadmap process, through the protection of IP and the freedom to operate, that we wind up using IP and understanding the IP strategy and aligning our IP strategy so that all of these pieces support each other, and we're able to be, and we're much more likely to be successful in strategic goals.
All right, this brings us to our 7th and final pain point and solution, and then we'll do a brief recap and then talk about next steps. So this pain point is the lack of a method to select your intellectual property to move forward. If you don't manage your IP, you won't get results. So some of the solutions to these First of all, your decisions should not be made in the abstract. And again, I come back to this concept of your IP steering committee. That's your cross-functional team that meets on a regular cadence to review your invention disclosures, to deal with freedom to operate issues, to make timely patent or trademark or trade secret decisions, to manage your patent maintenance and annuities, and to mentor your inventors. Really importantly, select and use meaningful KPIs. So how do you choose your KPIs and how do you make your decisions generally? So not in the abstract, but with a sound understanding of your company's own existing portfolio, including related patent families, competitive intelligence considerations, product marketing and timing considerations. For example, are you dealing with a high margin product or a low margin product? They're not created equal, and you want to spend less resources on the low margin products and more resources on the higher margin products. What are your geographies? Where are you going to be filing your patents? Where are your competitors producing their products is a critical consideration in determining where you're going to file your own patents. And then what's your launch timing? What kind of constraints do you have on your filings? What's your company's overall IP strategy? What's your budget? Where are you going to allocate your resources? Now, the choice of the right KPIs is one of the hardest but most important choices to make to achieve your targeted IP-related results. I would encourage you all to think today, what KPIs are you using to manage your IP? A lot of companies use metrics that I would consider important but mundane, and those would be metrics like your budget. Are you on track to meeting your budget, staying within target there? What's your volume of new disclosures? Because that's what feeds your patent funnel. However, if you have KPIs like pure volume-based targets, you got to be really careful to control for the quality of what you're doing. You don't want to say, oh, we need 100 invention disclosures this year if all that's going to do is generate 90 garbage disclosures and 10 that are actually worth considering. Make sure you use metrics that give you meaningful information about the value of your intellectual property. I would use a metric called ROIP, which is akin to ROMI for those of you who are in the marketing world. Think about what percentage of your patents actually cover products that you're selling today, as an example. But there are a variety of metrics that you can come up with, but you got to keep in mind what are the key considerations for your company and your space. George, back to you.
Yeah, and I think and of course this is the solution that you were just talking about. The use of the IP steering committee is really the solution to that pain point. I think you went through it really well. This is just a little extra information for that. And so when we come back to our 7 pain points, we have them on the left or the right, and I think you guys can see as we go through each of those. And the IP steering committee fits in pretty heavily. Getting process in that's standardized so that we're doing the same thing every time. Getting people trained so they're ready. These are the kinds of solutions that are going to address those 7 pain points. I don't know if you want to talk about this slide any, Ephraim.
I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's just a nice recap to everything we already covered.
Super. So next steps, let's say you want to get started. You can, so this is our one pager, one page in the sense on 2 sides of 1 piece of paper. And you can download this. This is part of the webinar control window will allow you to download this. And this will give you a recap of the things that Ephraim and I have been talking about. And if you like this kind of discussion, we are doing monthly innovation webinars through 2023, and we'll continue to do them, maybe not quite the cadence, but we'll continue doing them in 2024. So please join us as we touch on virtually every part of the innovation journey. There's also an innovation journey newsletter on LinkedIn if you'd like to join that. I write weekly on topics of innovation. It's a 3 to 5 minute read. And if you want to help me out, I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think I have about 35 to go. So any help you want to give me, I would certainly be grateful for. And then there's a couple of books on innovation that I was able to write as, I use writing as how I learn about innovation. That writing is it's a great way to learn. And so there's a couple of books if you're really interested in this and want to go further. There's lots. And then Lean Focus provides a wide range of webinars, not just on innovation, but on all things Lean. And this webinar, for example, will be cataloged. You can reach all of the webinars that we've done They're all available to you at our site on the link that you see here on screen. And so with that, we'll pass it back to April and see if we have any questions that Ephraim or I can take.
Great, thank you both so much for that presentation. And just a reminder to all of our attendees, you're welcome to type in any questions to the chat function. But I always pick up something new from the both of you whenever I watch you present. And it's interesting to hear how IP can be used from both an offense and defensive perspective to help the company with its differentiation and critical advantages. So this first question looks like it comes to you, George. How does the Kaizen training in this workshop specifically benefit engineers and developers involved in product development?
That's a great question because it's very practical. So what we want to do is, we want to, we want to teach the engineers what they need to know so they can take the inventions that are in their space. They may not even have recognized them as an invention. So partly we teach them how to recognize an invention, and then partly we teach them what to do. So when someone exits, part of what we want them to be able to do is start an invention or start an invention disclosure, or if they have something in mind, they can actually get going right during the class, or during the Kaizen, excuse me. And so we want to arm people that they can take action that will provide benefit for their organizations, coming right out of the Kaizen.
Great. Thank you so much. Ephraim, this next question comes to you. Can you provide more details on the strategies covered for ensuring the freedom to operate, or FTO, throughout that product development process?
Yeah, I'll give you a strategy that I would say applies in the industry or a space where your competitors have reasonable sized portfolios. So what does that mean? A reasonable sized portfolio would be, any given month, you might have 5 to 10 new patents being either published or granted. In a space like that, which would be common in, for example, if you're an automotive supplier, not a car maker, but a supplier of seats, steering wheels, turbochargers, transmissions, whatever. In that space, you're gonna end up with a small enough number of granted or published patents each month or quarter that a small number of people on your team can actually digest those and help you make some informed decisions about how does this impact your own product development process. Do you need to design around a patent because you're in the process of developing, you're early enough on that you can do that design around? Do you need to consider taking a license because you're far enough in your development process, you don't want to redesign it, or God forbid, you've already launched it, now this granted patent is published? So it informs, that kind of strategy would involve actually digesting, having a search done each month or each quarter so that you can identify and then digest the patents that are getting published or granted and deal with them. At the other extreme, if you're like a Lenovo and there are 1,000 patents a week being granted in the IP space that might impact a mobile phone or a personal computer, I wouldn't advise you to go through those patents. I'd advise you to use those strategies that take into account mass license schemes, protection against trolls, insurance policies, and more importantly, making sure that you have your own very robust portfolio so that you can deal with competitors through cross licenses or through counter attacks.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This question can go to either of you, but they ask, what distinguishes the approach to patent search techniques in this workshop? And what are some of the do's and don'ts emphasized?
George, go ahead. Yeah, so we do teach that you want to have a basic ability to be able to search through patents. You want to be able to read a patent. I mean, that's the first thing. Before you even start searching, one of the things you teach in the class is just, how are patents organized? Because it's really quite logical how they're organized, but it's different from, at least in my experience, any document that I've read. I can't think of any document that's organized quite like a patent. And so the first thing you have to do is understand what the different sections are, the body of the patent, how it is you read the claims, and what you can and can't depend on for the abstract. That gives you and then how to deal with the figures and the diagrams, because it's like I said, they're arranged differently. And then once you do that, now you're able to at least search at a very coarse level for what's being used in the field that you're in. Now, I'd like to pass this over to Ephraim now, because there are some risks around having inventors search. And so it's something that you want to do carefully, and you want to, and it needs to be done under the advisement of legal counsel. So maybe Ephraim, you could add to that and some of the things you and I were talking about earlier.
So I think George summarized that well. Make sure you have an appropriate framework for the review of the search results, and it is very good to have counsel involved, because then you can protect the comments on the results through the attorney-client privilege, because somebody's seeking legal advice or you're getting the advice from the attorney, and those things are privileged. But I would say, I would elevate for a second answering that question, and I would say before you even begin the process of searching or deciding what kind of search tool you're going to use or who's going to do the searches, is figure out first, what is the purpose of your search? Why are you engaging in searching, and what are you going to do with the results? Because if you can't answer those questions, you shouldn't be searching.
So this next question that came in is, how do you quantify the strategic value of an invention in the early phase of the gate process?
It's a really hard question, because for a variety of reasons. First of all, you don't know what your patent is ultimately going to look like, because you may have to tailor the claims or narrow the claims through the prosecution process. But let's assume that you have a concept that you believe is patentable, and you're quite confident that you're going to get claims that give you a full scope of rights to that concept. You have to determine how important is that concept to your product. Is that concept going to be the reason your product sells, or is it going to be one of 100 reasons why your product sells? Those are the things that go into the value of a patent. And at the back half, when you're asserting the patent and you're making a claim for reasonable royalties, that'll feed into the analysis of what is a reasonable royalty. But it's a really hard question to answer, April.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's directionally helpful.
Well, I'll add in too, from it is hard to measure. I'd say there's one other factor that, at least as a layman, that I felt affected by, was you don't really know where the technology is going. I mean, you're applying for a patent today that'll be issued in what, 2-3 years now, I think, and will be important to your business maybe 2 or 3 years from then. And so you're really looking at the technology, and I would say that another part about this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's a little bit of a gamble. So you're trying to make wise bets, because in the end, it's hard to know where the world's going, what's going to happen over that 5 or 7 years before you would even think about asserting a patent. And so, you don't expect every patent to be able to be asserted or to become important in the business, in the company's business. And so, Ephraim, maybe, I don't know what your thoughts are, but my thinking is, a lot of companies are doing 10 patents, and then maybe they will wind up with 1 or 2 that ultimately turn out to be important after those years pass.
Yeah, those numbers are probably more like 1 in 100 actually. But it's a terrific question though. They've got a couple ways to think about it. Number one is certainly give some thought to how pioneering you think your innovation is at that point. If you know you're onto something, like if you believe you're the first person who has CRISPR in a usable fashion, you need to file, the bejesus out of that. File 50 patents on it and make sure that you've got a range of claim scope when you're pioneering something like that, because you're likely onto something very valuable. The flip side of that is you might think that what you've done is kind of mundane and not that important. However, what IBM found when they went back and did a retrospective of their most valuable patents, the patents that had historically brought in the most revenue for them over time, it was the mundane things like the 8 seconds on the power off button, or the 4 power states for a laptop computer. And so don't discount those, what may seem as sort of simple solutions to problems that you encountered, as potential sources of really valuable innovation. But because of what George said, that you may have 10 patents or 100 patents that you file, only one's valuable, the other corollary to this is you really need to make sure that you have a robust process for deciding whether you're going to maintain your patents, pay the US maintenance fees or the European annuity fees down the road. Because if patents turn out not to be valuable, cut them and save yourself the expense of the maintenance.
I think that's such a great point, because a lot of people will think about a patent's going to cost me $100,000, because the average patent, you might spend $100,000 or $150,000 depending on how many jurisdictions you file in. But Ephraim, to your point, the cost of filing in the United States is fairly modest, And until you start hitting the renewal fees and start going to other jurisdictions, that's when the costs really mount up. And so I think that you make a great point that it's not really an all or nothing decision that you're making in the beginning. You're actually, you can walk this thing back if you decide that it's looking like it's not panning out without spending a ton of money.
Great, thank you, guys. I think
I want to mention one other thing. Two of the most famous patents I'm familiar with, and is the fellow who figured out that you could put a screen on the end of a faucet. Of course, these are years ago, but you put you put a screen on the end of a faucet, a kitchen faucet, so that the water would flow, would be aerated. And another one was a timer in the windshield wiper, so that you had the intermittent windshield wiper. And boy, those seem so mundane. But my understanding is those patents paid off, and they paid off handsomely for many years.
Great. No, thank you with that, George. Appreciate both of your time. I think that's it for all the questions here, but really thought-provoking presentation, and we want to thank all of our attendees for staying with us. Again, after about a day or so, a recording of this will be sent to your emails. So with that, thank you so much. Thank you to our presenters, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, April.